I went to a review of a book written by Dan McClellan, Dr. Dan McClellan. He is, he's actually quite famous as a TikToker. And he actually referenced that in his, he was responding. It was basically review. You had several people, scholars who were giving reactions to his book, which is about, I forget what it's called. Nelson, if you can Google it, it's like The Nature of YHWH, which he pronounces as Adonai, or something like that. And what he's talking about is what was what was the understanding of God, of deity in ancient Israel. And then they had several scholars responding to his view, and there was some critique, but by and large, they agreed with him. And what I found so interesting was the reaction of one of the response of the critics. I forget her name. Actually, I never knew her name. I'll be honest. So I'm sure she said it at the beginning, but I didn't know a lot of these folks who were speaking. And she said that what she's looking for when she studies the religion of ancient Israel is whatever the biblical text was opposed to, that was the original religion of ancient Israel. And I thought, wow, she said the quiet part out loud, because that is the approach that a lot of particularly critical scholars of so-called higher criticism of the Old Testament. And look, I deal with what's called lower criticism, and it's called lower because it's lower on the page. Not that it's lower in importance, but textual criticism. But the people who are trying to figure out how the biblical text was written in the first place, she explained her starting approach, or what she's really interested in, I should say, is what was Isaiah opposed to? That must have been the folk religion, the original religion, even the official religion of ancient Israel. What was Jeremiah opposed to? That was the religion of ancient Israel. And I thought that was such an interesting way to explain it. Okay, what did you find the name of the book, Nelson?
I think so. The one that comes up most recently is, and I'm going to pronounce it Yahweh just because I think
but he says Adonai actually.
Oh, okay.
He pronounces that Adonai. Yeah.
So it's Adonai's divine images, a cognitive approach.
Okay. Oh yeah, and a lot of it was the cognitive approach, which I don't know that we need to get into. But I thought her comment was so interesting that if Deuteronomy is telling you to cut down the Asherah poles, that's because Asherah was the original religion of ancient Israel, and YHWH, Adonai, Yahweh, however you pronounce it, had a consort, which in a sense is correct, but is that the original religion of ancient Israel, or was that a corruption of the religion of ancient Israel? And then it depends, do you believe the prophets, as we have them, were inventing a new religion and coming out to oppose an existing religion? Or were they, or were they the official, original, and official is an interesting word, because if you went to the court of King Manasseh, even according to the Tanakh, yes, Asherah was the wife of God. And if you didn't believe that, you'd be executed for heresy, right? Or if you didn't bring the sacrifices, maybe, I don't know. Now I'm making stuff up, right? I don't know if they actually execute people for heresy. I don't know if they had that concept, right? But definitely, it talks about in the time of Josiah, they were taking all these idols out of the temple. So her approach, and I forget her name, I apologize to her. We should try to find out, Nelson, and interview her. Her approach is, no, that Josiah is making up a new thing. Before that, all the ancient Israelites worshipped in that way, and Josiah is inventing a new approach. So I'll let you guys discuss.
Gosh, I have thoughts, but I don't want to hog the conversation.
No, please. We want to hear what you have to say.
Well, my first thought is how strikingly that uncovers the preconceptions and the pre-understanding that you're bringing to the table. So, and I'll explain what I mean. If you are willing to accept let's call it a hypothesis for now, that God really did appear to a bunch of quondam slaves at Mount Sinai, and really did enter into a special relationship there, and really did reveal something of his nature and etc., then, to my mind, that pretty decisively answers the question: okay, what is the original or authoritative religion of Israel going to look like? And so, for somebody to be willing to entertain different understandings of what the official religion or popular religion or whatever, it suggests to me that there is a kind of default assumption. Okay, we're assuming there was no Sinai, or we're assuming that if there was a Sinai, it doesn't. What we have in the biblical text isn't a faithful reflection of what was spoken there, and therefore all that we're left with is this kind of historical soup from which we need to kind of drag out the various ingredients as best we can from inscriptions, or from reading between the lines of the biblical text itself, or from archaeological remains, etc. So I think, if I've understood correctly, that's quite a nice demonstration of how this whole business of biblical criticism actually depends a huge amount on on your pre-understanding that you actually bring to the text before you start reading it. I'll pause there.
I think they would openly say that. I don't think that's something they're hiding. Meaning, if I'm going to put words now into the mouth of the lady whose name I can't remember, which is always a dangerous thing, because maybe I'm wrong. But I think she would say, well, that's the approach of a conservative apologist, to say that God actually revealed himself at Mount Sinai, and we have to, as historians, assume that that's not the case, and that was all made up later. And then when they approach the New Testament, they'll say the same thing. That I'll give you an example. Like James Tabor has said, as an historian, I can't engage with Jesus rising from the dead. What I can engage with is people believe that Jesus rose from the dead, which is actually more than people are willing to stipulate in the case of Mount Sinai, right? And I agree with the statement in the sense that, as critical historians, I don't know that we can say that. I believe God revealed himself at Mount Sinai. But the question we can engage with is, did the ancient Israelites believe? Whether he actually did or not is a question of faith, because we weren't there. But did the ancient Israelites believe that? And I think these folks would say, no, that was, that's like about saying, that they look at that as like legends about King Arthur, that they were made up hundreds of years later. And I think you're absolutely right, Kim. It shows their starting preconceptions, and I'll even use the word bias. And I don't have a problem with them having a bias, because I have a bias when I study Islam. I don't believe the angel Jibril revealed himself in a cave to Muhammad, but I also believe that Muhammad's disciples believed that the angel Gabriel revealed himself, and maybe Muhammad himself believed that even. And so here we have to, I think, distinguish between faith and what we can talk about as critical historians. They definitely have. So here's the problem I have with their approach. I think they would say they don't have a bias, and we do. And I think we should acknowledge everybody has some sort of a bias, right? My starting assumption is that God did have this covenant with Israel.
Yeah. I think acknowledging that we all have biases is very important, rather than sort of lobbing it like a brick over the fence to explain why they're wrong. It's because they're biased. We all have biases. We all start from a particular place. But I think what it does sometimes make me want to think is, well, I want to listen to what you say, because I can see that you're a good scholar. I can see that you're going back to evidence. I can see that you're doing the work carefully. But equally, if at any point you say, therefore you are wrong for believing X, Y, and Z, I want to say, well, really? If I started from your set of assumptions, maybe, but why should I start from your set of assumptions? What if I have other good reasons for thinking that there really was a revelation at Sinai? Then already we've started from very different places, and so we're going to interpret the evidence differently. So it gives me a kind of caution before I get too worried about some of the some of the things that I hear getting said. Yeah, from my faith perspective.
To me, this is this sort of missed opportunity. If you believe what the prophets say, then the Israelites were influenced by the Canaanite religion, and so if we want to understand that Canaanite religion, and let's say you went to the average house in, I don't know, the northern Samaria somewhere in the year 850 BCE, and you said, okay, what is it you believe? How do you practice your faith? I think they probably might not be too far off on their conclusions. In some ways not. But then the question is, how do we explain that? How did that come to be? And if you asked one of their priests in those days, they might actually agree with Dan McClellan and say, no, this is the original religion, and those people down south and that pesky prophet Hosea, he is coming to destroy our ancient faith. And we are the conservatives who are preserving the religion of our ancestors that goes back to Moses. Right? That's the whole point of Judges, of that story of Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, or apparently Moshe, is that it seems that the people at these high places had a chain of tradition that brought their faith, claimed their faith went back to Moses. And the prophets we have in our Bible disagree with them. So most of them anyway. Some of them don't really refer to that necessarily, but most of the prophets seem to disagree with them. Maybe all of them.
Sure. I wish I'd been at the session. It sounds very interesting. I certainly think that examining ancient Near Eastern sources, examining the epigraphic evidence as well, that we've, etc., is very, very informative. I don't have a problem at all with saying that some of the images that we see in Scripture are taken from ancient Near Eastern mythology, ancient Near Eastern ways of understanding the world. In fact, to my mind, when you look at the comparative data, it seems blindingly obvious. But that I don't have a problem with that at all. How else? If a preacher today doesn't use images and metaphors that are relevant to today's culture, he's not going to be understood. And in the same way, if the prophets back then, they were communicators, so they had to use images that were meaningful, viable to their audience.
That's a profound statement, Kim. And the example that comes to mind is where it talks about God in I think I want to say it's in Psalms, and it uses a bunch of metaphors that we have that are in the ancient Near East applied to Baal. Right? He's the rider on the clouds, and he's the one who brings thunder and lightning, and I may be misquoting it, right? But something to that effect, right? But that doesn't mean that they worship Baal. It means that, I'll use a modern Christian terminology when they talk about Christmas. They'll say this is a victory for the church, right? That's something I hear a lot, that there were, some people say, well, Christmas has pagan origins, the Yuletide log and all that. Okay, but if you're trying to convert a bunch of pagans in Norway, and they're not going to give up this symbolism, what you can do is reinterpret that symbolism as applying to Jesus rather than Zeus, right, or something like that. And it's not the exact same thing, but I think maybe there is some parallel. It is a similar strategy. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm aware that I haven't really given Nelson much chance to respond, but I remember distinctly a sermon many years ago, and it will clarify to the people of the relevant age how long ago this was, when the preacher was talking about our access to God in prayer, and he was saying that in Christ our access is like broadband internet rather than dial-up internet. It's which, if I was trying to preach a similar sermon today, I wouldn't be able to use that, because people would go, what's dial-up? Well, I haven't got a clue. And so it was an example there of an image or a metaphor being used, which was incredibly bound to a particular period of time. 20 years earlier, people wouldn't have had a clue, because what on earth is broadband? 20 years later, people wouldn't have a clue, because what on earth is dial-up? But for that short period of time, it was a metaphor that spoke to people, that communicated. And so he was right to use it at that time.